Good morning, friends. It is good to join with you here on this last Friday in July. Somehow the month has already flown by, and it is a cloudy one here in Kirksville. Warm though it is, we kind of moved from cool to hot overnight. That happens in Missouri often. Well, as I'm thinking about that question, how is it with our souls? I don't know about you, but one of the first responses I had to that question this week was frazzled. It just seems this week like the world has been on edge. I don't know if any of you have experienced that as well, but maybe it's the heat, I don't know, but it just seems like everything has been anything but peaceful this past week. I think for many of us, that image of a stormy sea has probably described some of this month well. Now, last Sunday, Scott and Jennifer preached on one of those stormy sea passages that shows up in the Gospels. It tells of the disciples out at sea in their boat in the middle of a stormy night fighting against the wind. And Jesus comes to them on the water, and they are in their already fearful state, fighting against the wind, their discouragement. They assume that he's a ghost. And so there they are, stuck in the boat, thrown into even more fear and distrust at the beginning of this story. And now each of the Gospels tells a slightly different version of different stormy sea, out on the boat in the middle of the lake stories. And in the one that shows up in the Gospel of Mark, it's paired then with Jesus issuing an invitation to the disciple Peter. He's invited to move from a place of fear to one of trust. Jesus says, step out of the boat and onto the water. I don't know about you, but stepping out to trust God, that is not always easy. Now, for most of us, it probably won't look like a literal boat and stepping literally onto the water, but we probably all have times in life where we get that sense that we need to step out into the unknown, that God is calling us to trust in something different for what lies ahead. And that can be tough because we're hanging on to the sides of the boat, even though that may not be a great place to be at. And it's hard to muster up that courage to have that trust in God to let go. Well, I've been reading through this book this summer, The Beads of Healing by Kristen Vincent. And in the chapter I'm reading this week, she writes that she realized that part of her journey of trusting God was to let go of her fear. Now, for her, this was happening around the same time the book The Shack had come out. And it tells the story of Mac, a man whose daughter was kidnapped and murdered. And in the book, he talks with God about letting go of what he calls the great sadness that had come to define his life ever since his daughter's traumatic death. And as Vincent read through that book, she realized that for her, it wasn't a great sadness. For her, it was a great fear based on her childhood trauma. And as part of God's gradual work of healing, she realized maybe in order to trust God, in order to experience that peace that Jesus was offering, for her to be able to step out of the boat and into that unknown, she needed to let go of the great fear. Like Peter, she was at that place where she was still in the boat. Could she step out onto the water? Could she step out and trust? So she and some trusted friends decided that it was time to put the great fear to rest. They decided to select several rocks to represent her fear. The plan was to go up on the mountainside, to bury the rocks, and then plant daffodils on top of them. Well, once she got to the place that she had chosen, she discovered that unfortunately the ground was too hard and rocky to even begin to dig a hole. There was no way that she could carry out her plan. And so instead, she threw them off the cliff. One by one, she named her fears and then launched a stone over the edge, hesitantly at first and then with more gusto, as she went through each of her fears. My fear of failing, of being imperfect, of rejection, of giving up control, of being hurt, of being abandoned by God. There was a labyrinth nearby, down toward the base of the mountain, and as she walked that afterwards, she realized that would be the perfect place to plant the daffodils, because the ground there was very full of soil that would handle the bulbs. And she reflected as she walked. Moving toward the center of the labyrinth, I gave thanks to God for the healing God had wrought in my life, and for the fact that I was able to release my fear and put it to rest. But my prayer changed once I reached the center. Having released the great fear, the time had come to see what my life was like without it. It had defined me for most of my life and had become firmly ingrained in my identity. I acknowledged the times when I'd clung to it, even as I prayed for the strength to let go. Now I'd done that. Who was I now? What would my life be like? She reflected that surely that must be what Peter was feeling as he was watching Jesus beckon him to walk on the water. He wanted to do it. He's ready to trust Jesus at the same time that there were nerves and doubt and fear. What would happen when he stepped out of the boat? She writes, exiting the labyrinth, I didn't know what to expect. It was scary, but not in a great fear kind of way. It meant that I was going to have to trust Jesus, myself, and those who supported me as I stepped out of the boat and onto the surface of the water. It meant I was moving closer to peace. And so as you think about that question today, how is it with your soul? I wonder, is there a particular feeling that comes to mind? Is there maybe one that comes back again and again in your life? One that brings struggles whenever life seems to get a little frazzled, that you lean into more, that you find consuming more of your time and your energy? And does it impact your ability to trust God with the future? If there is, I wonder what that might be like to release it. These things we carry get heavy the longer we hold them, and we may not even realize the weight of what we're holding on to. Letting go might just be part of that journey to experiencing the peace that God offers. And so my prayer for us today, God of love, help us to experience your peace by the power of your Son, Jesus Christ. Lead us to a place of complete trust, opening our hearts to what that means and looks like for each of us. Help us to trust you, dear Lord. Help us to trust ourselves and others. Help us to trust that as we step out of our boats, whatever those are, that you will be there to meet us. And where we aren't even sure how to begin, show us one small way we can begin to trust, and help us see the difference that will make in our lives. Help us be encouragers of one another as we muster up the courage to trust you. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who offers his peace that passes all understanding. Amen. Well, friends, as you go, may the days ahead, if the ones behind have been frazzled, may there be more peace. And may you lean into trusting God. Take care, and I will see you again here next week. Have a great weekend.